Start. All right. Hello. We have a special guest today, and I would love to introduce to you guys my mom. This
Hi.
is Jan Daniels, and she was born in 1950, which means she was very much alive in the 1960s. And Mom, thank you so much for coming today.
Well, I'm thrilled to be here. Hi, guys.
You have actually come to my class over the past years.
I have, and that's been fun. And
I'd like to do
that. I'd like to do that again sometime.
But you know, with technology now, we got the iPad right here. We were doing this interview at my mom's house, and pretty cool that we have the technology to actually show this to the students here. So let's get into this here. 1960, you were 10 years old.
I was.
Right. And it would have been up till late 60s, you would have been close to 20. Tell me about the fashions that you guys had in the 60s. What guys wear, what girls wear?
Well, as you know, that's a big age span from a 10-year-old little girl to a 20-year-old woman. So I'm going to probably refer to it as early 60s, middle 60s, and the end 60s, late 60s. In the early 60s, little girls wore poodle skirts and we wore saddle shoes. When we went to school, we weren't allowed to wear pants or shorts or jeans. They didn't even have jeans for little girls.
No jeans.
No jeans. Boys wore jeans, but they were pressed starch jeans with little plaid shirts. And the only time we were ever allowed to wear shorts or jeans or slacks, we didn't have jeans, or slacks to school was one day a year on field day. We got to do that.
Oh my gosh.
And then that was kind of the beginning. And then in the middle or late, fashion changed. And bell-bottom trousers, you probably all have heard of the hippie stage, which kind of came in the late 60s. And that was bell-bottom trousers and flowered shirts. And I actually brought an example of a outfit that I wore.
Look at this.
In
it's amazing.
The 60s, and this was really cool then.
You actually wore this.
And I did, and it was the flowered and very, very popular. Also, leather. Leather came in for both men and women. Macrame. Everybody had little leather. Sometimes you would wear it around your neck. Sometimes you'd wear a little headband like this. I had some leather Indian moccasins. Both men and women, both, boys and girls, would wear little leather bracelets, so that leather was really in. Beads came in, and that was beads and shells, and this was kind of during the late 60s for the hippie stage.
That is awesome. So you weren't a hippie, were you?
No. And I grew up in Kansas City, just a little bit further north in Prairie Village than where you guys live now. Where Olathe, it was all just farms and farmland back when I grew up. But the Midwest was always kind of conservative compared to the East Coast, New York area, or the West Coast, LA. So whatever you read about some of the big fads that were hitting in that area probably didn't hit. We had hippies, but we didn't have them as much as they did like in California and New York.
Gotcha. So tell me about the fads of the 60s. Like, what was the cool thing to do when you were a kid?
Well, when we were little, you got to remember the technology has changed so much from now. We didn't have anything like you guys have. We didn't have cell phones or video games or video, any kind of... so we just basically played outside. The hula hoop was really popular. I played hopscotch. I played jacks. We played in the yard. We just ran around and played, and the boys played baseball. We didn't have fancy equipment, and we didn't have a lot of the TV. On television shows, there were only a couple television shows, so we didn't really watch a lot of TV like everybody does now.
Right.
So we played. We played in the yard.
What a novel idea, playing in the yard. Something these kids could probably do more of, maybe?
I think so.
Get a little exercise, go outside, have
Get
fun.
off that social media.
Yeah, right. So in the 60s, it was pretty cool because there's lots of celebrities and movie stars. Who were some of the ones that you remember?
Well, my favorite were probably Sonny and Cher. I love Sonny and Cher. And Marilyn Monroe was another famous movie star, and Elizabeth Taylor. Marilyn Monroe would probably be compared to your Angelina Jolie or somebody like that today.
Okay.
The celebrities for the guys or men would be Rock Hudson or Paul Newman, Robert Redford. Paul Newman was probably compared to somebody like a Brad Pitt or something like that.
Yeah.
So those were some of the main celebrities. Some of the key people that I remember, like, well, our president was John Fitzgerald Kennedy, and I was actually in 8th grade when he was assassinated, so that was a very memorable time for me. Martin Luther King was a very popular, and he also was assassinated. Richard Nixon was one of our presidents. Those are some of the names that come to my mind right away.
Yeah. Now, you mentioned all those movie stars, Paul Newman and Robert Redford. Just want to clear the record here. None of those guys had anything on Dad, though, did they?
Oh, no. I didn't even know him then. No. Hadn't even met him.
So, love 60s music. Gotta love the two bands that people listened to were Elvis and the Beatles. And what... Did you have a preference, or did you?
Well, they play different types of music. I think Elvis is always going to be a diehard. I mean, he's fantastic.
Yeah.
And the Beatles were kind of broken down into two types of music. I personally liked their early music better. I didn't like it as much when they got into the psychedelic stuff. But their early, I Want to Hold Your Hand, and some of those were my. They actually came to Kansas City when I was in 8th grade, and they played out at the old A's Stadium in downtown, and I wanted to go, but my mom wouldn't let me go. So I did see Michael Jackson when he came in town later, and I did go out and see him, but that was later on.
1980s.
So, yeah,
I remember I was
older.
a little boy. But so, like, adults, though, didn't they kind of, like, frown upon the Beatles and Elvis a little bit? Were they a little too much rock and roll, too alternative for them, or did they embrace them? I don't know.
There was a popular TV show, the Ed Sullivan Show, and all of the popular artists were always on. And my parents watched Ed Sullivan every Sunday night. Yeah. So I think my mom and dad were pretty with it as far as some of the popular music. Also, Motown came in really in the mid to late 60s with Diana Ross and the Supremes, and the Temptations and the Four Tops, and some of that music is still very popular today. It's just traditional. Yeah,
I like the music of the 60s, very timeless. And the one thing I wanted to ask you about, the book we're reading, The Outsiders, is a cowboy culture, and they talk about horse riding. And you, growing up as a kid here in the Midwest, actually had a horse.
I did. I don't know if any of you are familiar with the area, 119th and Row Boulevard. It's kind of Town Center Plaza. There's a great big crate and barrel there. And that's where, back in the 60s, that was all farms and pastures. And that's where we boarded my horse, Nugget. And we just had one horse. And every night after school, I would go out and ride my horse. I would take him his grain, and he was a Palomino quarter horse. So I would ride, but I would pretend on him. And sometime I would pretend that he was a jumper, and I would put a bareback pad on him and pretend and jump him. And then another day I would pretend he was a barrel race. I was barrel racing, and we actually set up barrels, and I did barrel racing. But most of the time, he was entered in, when I did show him, I show him at the American Royal, and there was a famous Benjamin Ranch, which is no longer, but the Howard Benjamin used to have a big horse show, and I would enter him in Ladies Western Pleasure and the Palomino Bridle. And he always placed. He always did good.
Always did well.
He always did good.
Yeah. So when I was born, I actually had pictures of me next to Nugget.
Nugget was retired, and he was put on my aunt's farm down in Drexel, Missouri, which was about, 2 hours south of here. And after I got married and started having children, then I wasn't able to ride Nugget anymore, and he died of old age.
Did you do barrel racing with Nugget, you said?
I did a little bit, yeah. I did a little bit.
That's the one thing that they talk about in our book is how the girls did barrel racing. Can you really quickly explain what barrel racing is?
Well, you set up big barrels in a corral or an arena, and you have a horse that races as fast as he can go, and you rein him around the barrels, and it's kind of like figure eights, and if you knock the barrel over, you're disqualified. And the judges time you, and it's on a time, and so each person's like running a race, except you're running around these barrels. And so the horse and the rider that make the barrels in the least amount of time without knocking barrels over are the winners. Cool. So it's kind of dangerous. In fact, if any of you've ever been to the American Royal, some of the really cowgirls really do get into it. I was never quite that good, but I did attempt it a little bit.
So kind of wrapping up, 1960s, like if I was to ask you, like, what's the one thing you remember the 60s as, what comes to your mind, like just in your head?
Well, I think the first thing would probably be more the late 60s, and that would be probably with the Vietnam War starting. And that started the hippie generation, and they didn't treat our soldiers nice back then like they do now. And regardless of whether you are for or against one of our political war situations, the soldiers now are still treated with respect. And back then they weren't, and it was really sad. And so there was a draft, and a lot of young boys right out of high school, 18, 19 years old, were being drafted. There was they had to go. There wasn't a choice that they had to go. And so to think that people were protesting and booing and hissing at them when they returned, it is very sad to me.
It is sad, especially considering today we have Veterans Day and we revere those people, and kind of good that the way we got back on the right
But that
track.
and technology, you guys don't know how much technology's changed. We had one phone in our house, and it was usually a phone that had a cord on it. And if you made a phone call, you had to go, sit there with your mom and dad and everybody listening. No television. We just had a few shows we watched. We didn't have, all the technology that you guys have today.
Yeah, it's crazy what these kids have.
We had encyclopedias. We didn't have Googles. We didn't Google
Internet wasn't
or
even born
Wikipedia.
yet.
So we had to go to the library and check a book out, and if we were doing a research paper.
So how about this? What's in the interview on this question? If you had any advice to give these kids, this is not on the topic of the 60s, what would you tell them, Mom? You're always so good about giving me advice. What would you tell them?
Oh, geez. I would tell you to honor your mom and dad.
There you go.
Respect your teachers.
Yeah, especially this one.
They're all trying to help you be a better person for the future.
Well, Mom, thank you so much for coming. Can I get a hug? Get over here. Big hug.
Love you.
Love her so much. Thank
Bye.
you guys for watching.